Today's about substance, right? So this is how we're kicking it off. Is my trend is less production design, more substance. So with that, I'm really honored to be joined by some of the smartest people in this industry. And again, you can't read their titles or names because of formatting errors. But I'm gonna start by allowing them to introduce themselves. So Matt Raymond, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Good to be here with everybody. My first webinar of 2026 as well. I'm the VP of Product at Humanly. I've been here for, I guess it's coming up on 2 years. And before that, I was the head of product at a company called Teamable, eventually the CEO of Teamable, eventually acquired by Humanly. I've also spent a lot of time in marketing technology with companies like MailChimp, biometric and information security technology, companies like Pindrop, which are wildly applicable to the talent acquisition and HR tech market as well right now. So it's all come together nicely for me. But I think that's a good enough intro, at least for now. But I'm happy to be here with y'all and excited to be having this conversation with Matt.
Yeah, and thank you for facilitating it. Mr. Adams, welcome.
Well, thanks, Matt, and hi, everybody. I'm Bryan Adams. I'm the CEO and founder of HappyDance. We're an enterprise level career website platform. We focus on candidate experience and intelligent experiences online to leverage employer brand to do what it should be doing. So we work with customers like General Motors, Peloton, Canva, other enterprise brands like that. And my obsession in life is employer brand and candidate experience. So I've been in the space about 20 years, written a couple of books. Some of you may know Give and Get. So that's my passion in life, and that's probably the sort of origins of my opinions for the next 45 minutes or so. So I'll hand it back to you, Matt. Let's
Yeah, and
show them the runway.
last but and probably least, I'm Matt Charney. I am the lead analyst for Kyle and Co. We are a boutique analyst firm. I specialize in high volume, hourly, emerging markets and capital markets. So I look at a lot of tech all day. I'm also the editor of Media Bistro and associate editor at ERE. So do a lot of writing and trend analysis. So um, let's kick this off. So I know what you're probably all thinking, which is like, great, another webinar, and I totally feel you, particularly on trends, right? Because like everyone has these trend webinars. Here's what's happening. What I'm going to say is that we don't have a vendor specific playbook. We don't have a case study that we're trying to trumpet or jam home. We want to make this as open as possible. So one of the things that I really want to level set at this point is the goal here is to have a dialogue between some very smart people. I encourage disagreement, but the goal is clarity. It's not consensus. So fees, I know that we'll have a Q&A window in there. So if at any point in time you don't like a hot take or you want to disagree with something that's said, please weigh in, and Birch will be watching that. And we'll take it from there. And hopefully this will be a good conversation. So let's start at the very beginning, which is look at this amazing stock art. This is what Google puts, like when you get those framed pictures at the pharmacy and it's got like other people's relatives in there. This is Google's version of that. So bear with me here. But essentially, what we're looking at is I'm sure you all know sourcing has fundamentally changed, and the traditional playbook really has too. So we're so used to kind of just reinventing the wheel, job opens, post it out, build, see who applies, and then ignore all those people and think we're clever building Boolean strings. But what we're seeing actually is some diminishing returns there. Some things that are happening, obviously, are really looking at conversion. Anyone can find a name now. Now, getting that name to respond to you a little bit harder, particularly when it comes to candidate expectations and responsiveness. So, with that said, I do want to start off with Matt, and I know that you are looking at quite a lot of clients, a lot of sourcing, sort of one of Humanly's fundamental strengths. Um, at where are you seeing clients start to have the most diminishing returns when it comes to translating kind of top of funnel leads into hires? Where are you seeing bottlenecks forming in the process, Matt?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think in general, I mean, there's two directions there, right? Where there's the applicant sourcing and there's the passive sourcing. I mean, the candidate supply is high. At least right now, candidate supply is extremely high. I think where we're seeing a lot of diminishing returns. I mean, 100 billion-ish plus spent on job ads, applicant sourcing, employer brand reach, trying to get your name out there and making sure everybody's aware that these jobs, to your point, Matt, are out there and available. I think it's easier than ever to apply to jobs. It's easier than ever to self-select, which is really poor from an applicant standpoint. And what we're seeing is just noise, mass amounts of volume. So capacity is where the diminishing returns are primarily from a sourcing perspective. Is you can't scale yourself as a recruiter or as a recruiting team, both to process applicants, to review resumes, to have those early conversations on top of funnel, to spray and pray or be more selective in your passive sourcing model. The doing more with less kind of age is upon us, and I think that's where, at least what we're seeing it humanly, the diminishing returns are. It's you can't scale yourself as a team, and having those conversations, getting more context, making better decisions is where I think the diminishing returns are really starting to come into play, at least what we're seeing.
Right. And obviously, volume of sourcing does not materially improve quality of hire, which is another fallacy. Just out of curiosity, do you have a ballpark of what percentage of source candidates actually convert to meaningful conversations? Because we're
So
so used to hearing that 200 applications per open role, but of those, how many actually become engaged in the process?
yeah, so if you're lucky. Well, let me kind of reframe this. I think 5% of applicants are typically where we're seeing recruiting teams spend time. So you're getting spending a lot of money getting them to all be interested in a job. You're spending 5% the time with 5% of them. And from a passive sourcing standpoint, if you can get 5 to 8% of passive candidates interested, mutual interest is what I would call it. You're doing well amongst your peers. So I think take that 5%, the pass through rate of probably 10 to 20%. That is a massive compared to where you started on the pool size to where you wind up beyond top of funnel. It has just got a lot of candidates out there either with no outcome, they're in a black hole, they're not sure what's going on, you can't spend time with them, and it's a like I said, the diminishing returns are massive when you get into the amount of money being spent trying to attract these candidates.
And so just one quick follow-up there. Do you think that like when it comes to sourcing, organizations right now are optimizing for response rates, like we just talked about, or are they actually optimizing for that hire at the end of the process?
I think so. It's funny you should ask. I truly think they're optimizing for uh, interest conversion, right? So if you're thinking about it from a passive standpoint, I'm interested in the amount of outreach I'm doing, what's the mutual interest rate I'm getting back, and from an applicant in an inbound perspective, I'm interested in how full is the top of my funnel, and that's what I'm optimizing for versus the quality signal and the actual conversion rate beyond not just conversion to interest, but my conversion rate as a pipeline into candidates we actually want to spend time with and learn more about.
Great. Now, I just kind of want to flip it over a little bit to Bryan. Now, Bryan, obviously, you're coming at sourcing from a little bit different perspective. So I'm just kind of curious if you could rebuild the sourcing function today, where would you allocate budget? What are you seeing to be the most effective when it comes to building an effective and engaged pipeline?
Yeah, so I think where this is headed and where we're seeing real quality and value at the end of the attribution, if you can measure it end to end, is basically anything that you can put in a transactional mindset bucket is a diminishing return. And then the hard yards of really understanding your organization, producing authentic culture, authentic content that talks about what the culture is really like, what the employee experience really is, and then targeting talent that you really think is a good match from all aspects of the spectrum, from hard skills to soft skills to stage of a career and all the rest of it. we're now starting to see the organizations that are leaning into doing the hard yards to go about it in that quality, authentic way are starting to get the results, and it doesn't happen overnight. But what's interesting now is I think technology and the way the market is forcing more organizations to think that way, whether they like it or not. So anyway, the quick answer to your question is I think the paid media, the sort of Indeed traffic, anything that's transactional and volume based is fast becoming a complete waste of time.
Sure. Now, just in terms of structure, because recruiters love pedantics, I know that, historically, talent attraction, employer branding, and sourcing, while they have similar goals, generally tend to sit in separate functions or silos. Do you see any change in that? Is employer branding a sourcing function?
That's such an interesting question because in my experience for I'd be interested what the audience think about this as well, is, doing employer brand for 20 years, usually the sourcing function, believe it or not, is the last function to actually pick up and leverage the employer brand. Usually they're just using their personal brand and doing what they think or what they have to do that's effective. For the first time ever, I'm now seeing a sourcing function that's embracing employer brand and picking up the tools and the resources and assets and going to market and using the language and the stories because that's what's actually starting to work. And that's like I haven't seen that in 20 years.
Wow. Great. So obviously one of the things with both sourcing and increasingly employer branding is there's a lot of tools out there that we love to buy. They're kind of shiny and new. I'm obviously segueing well into the AI conversation here, but how much of sourcing do you think exists to justify that spend on tools rather than outcomes?
It's an interesting one. I think I think the concept of sourcing is starting to be reinvented, where it really is more about targeting towards quality and taking a lot more deliberate time to target and qualify talent that's really going to be a good match for the organization. And the things that we talked about years ago, in theory, that would be brilliant that we didn't have the technology for, like now technology is catching up and making it possible to do that targeting and tailoring at scale. Um, but the other side of that coin is there's also, I always say this, it's never the tools, it's how you use the tools. We're also going through a bit of a maturity phase where there's a there's a crappy way of using the tools as well, and to just do more of what you used to do at scale. So I think we've got to wade through that little sort of generation as well, like first, before getting to the place where we learn our lessons such that more of the same isn't necessarily better. And that begs the question, some of the things that we used to celebrate, like conversion percentages on a careers site and volume of applicants, is we're just throwing them out now. So this is the opportunity to rewrite what success looks like, which as a sort of recovering employer brander is really interesting now that we're focused on the technology and the tools to support TA leaders to get where they need to be.
Great. One last question, Bert, before we'll switch over to AI. I'm curious, in your mind, Brian, like obviously a lot of what you just said is coming down to changes in candidate behaviors.
Mm.
What assumptions do you see your clients and other employers making about candidate behavior that still seem to be operating in that 2019 modality that just clearly aren't true now?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, I think there was a bit of an assumption that it's the organizations and companies that have all of the technology and tools, and we can do things differently, but the candidate is still applying the same. I think that learning curve was very short, and everybody now is starting to get around to the fact that candidates are 50% AI, and what that means is the the signal's getting weaker, but the noise is getting louder. So now we really need to pay more attention to assessing and analyzing every single application and trying to distinguish between what a good candidate looks like versus a bad one. And you know, I think that's something that a lot of our customers are really still wrestling with. And also, like, you can't just have one rule across the entire organization. You know, we're certainly seeing different talent segments in the same organization having to be treated completely different. The good news is, if you have the strategy and you understand your audience sufficiently, you now have the tools to be able to design an experience and a process that is ideally tailored. But I think there's still organizations that are really wrestling with the strategy, not the tool to enable the strategy.
Right. Which should be the first place you always look, right? Like you don't need a solution if you don't have a problem, generally.
Exactly.
Great. So perfect. This couldn't be a trend webinar if we didn't talk about AI ad nauseum. So moving on to our next point, let's look at AI's real impact on recruiter workflow. So essentially, the headline here is AI is not going to replace recruiters. It just changes how they work, right? Um, at least that's the general sentiment. I think that remains to be seen, to be honest with you. But really, the real impact, I think we're seeing across the board from AI is really not it's not, kind of the generative flashy tools. Really, it's removing friction from repetitive work and to Brian's point, surfacing better signals earlier in the funnel than we were able to do before. So, Matt, just in terms of looking at the AI landscape today, what do you think are the most underleveraged possibilities that you're seeing that AI could be applied to for talent acquisition success?
Good question. I think I'm going to say some of the obvious because I don't know that it's necessarily underused. I'll start there. I think that the most, I guess, call them table stakes, he's the most comfortable maybe use of AI that may or may not be underused, like just kind of setting the foundation is exactly what you said, those repetitive tasks. So I think that the transactions, as Brian mentioned, around Q&A and answering questions, and even some of this is utilizes having a AI be a spokesperson for your EVP or your career brand or your culture and the benefits and everything that you want talent to know and understand about you. I think that is you can't have a 100,000 conversations a day with everyone that might be interested in your company. So I think that is starting to become more prevalent, but it's a great way of leveraging AI to be kind of that spokesperson for you to be trained on what what your anyone on your team would know, and be that best foot forward for your career brand. I think there are other very repetitive things like scheduling and coordination and things that AI just does really well and is lower risk. But I think where it's underutilized the most, at least, and from humanly standpoint, in my own kind of passion is these early top of funnel conversations, right? So I think what AI does a really good job of doing is, understanding who you're trying to hire, what you're hiring for, and how that translates to a candidate, their background, their aspirations, who they are philosophically, what are they looking to do versus the rear view kind of look of their resume and their pedigree. How do we look at forward and the windshield of what that candidate wants to be in their next role or the next 5 years? And those conversations can be had at scale, and that's context that can be used to, one, prioritize your time to learn more about those candidates. Like, it's not just about resume review anymore. At least I hope it's not, right? It should be more about an X-ray version of what you can kind of infer, predict, and understand about somebody based on their background. But you can't learn anything about like the qualitative nature of that background without having a conversation with them, right? So I think the most underutilized thing that kind of circling back to your original question is that if you can have these conversations at scale, learn about those candidates at scale, use it in conjunction with these other kind of AI tools that are being used to parse and review resumes and look at keywords and try to infer skills and do all these things that are becoming more and more table stakes. That is an underutilized area of AI that will help create a 360-degree view of a corpus of candidates that you would not have unless you could scale yourself. If I could clone myself and have the 100 conversations a day, but everybody just wondering about, I want to learn more about this role, and or if I find one that I really love, am I a good fit? Like culturally, am I a good fit in my background? Is this match where I want to go professionally from a career standpoint? AI does a great job if you've got the right kind of guardrails, training, and kind of facilitation in place to be able to have those conversations at scale. So I think we've got to go beyond what we've been talking about for it seems like forever now around let's pull two digital artifacts, try to match them together and stack rank a bunch of candidates, and that's how AI helps you scale your team and save time. Let's do better in terms of what we know and understand about those candidates to have those conversations at scale and leverage AI to be able to be that kind of part of your team, that agent that's skilled in facilitating those conversations. So now as an actual human and recruiting team, you've got all that available to you to make better decisions and prioritize your time, in a more effective way.
I'm going to put you on the spot now because obviously we're going to talk about the importance of like data analytics and all that in a second, but AI is so weird. Like if you had to manage sort of a sourcing function, how would you quantify AI success? What does that look like? What are some of the major outcomes that you would be benchmarking against?
It's a great question. I think, I would start to look at time to that first conversation, time to when I say time to that first conversation, I mean from an AI perspective. There's mutual interest. I need a conversation. An outcome as a candidate. What's that time frame? I'm measuring my pipeline differently based on a conversation funnel versus a pass-through funnel based on like our traditional metrics and outcomes. So I'm trying, like, time to is something we talk a lot about, at least in product development side at Humanly, is what's my time to have that first AI conversation? So my time to have that first human conversation. Ultimately, what's my time to hire? That tells us, is the signal there? Is AI helping to address, like to Brian's point, the mitigation of noise and the promotion of signal in the overall kind of pool of candidates that you're assessing? So it's a lot of time-based outcomes. I think a lot of it will come as a lagging indicator in terms of quality of hire, right? So how successful was that hire? How long have they been with us? Are they effective from a performance standpoint? So getting that labeled data back and understanding where hires made and then what's the performance post-hire are also extremely, and I know that's an existing paradigm that's very important, but I think the AI piece is, I think the way that you can translate promote signal is based on time, based on throughput, and based on that conversation funnel versus like I mentioned, your more traditional kind of resume review to your traditional kind of pipeline metrics across the hiring funnel. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, that was a very comprehensive answer, and I appreciate it. So I'm gonna ask Brian, knowing obviously the different approach here, as AI becomes more and more prevalent, what work and talent acquisition do you believe absolutely must remain human?
Well, I think the job of AI, I mean, we think we've covered the basics there in terms of more efficiency and doing things at scale and getting the sort of admin of recruitment out of the way and so on and so forth. But I think what's happening really is we're elevating the job of the recruiter to be more of a talent advisor. And if we can create more space um, and more capacity for a recruiter to be that talent advisor and speak with more people and give them a human experience, then I think you're more likely to get a better quality candidate and to hold on to that candidate through to successful hire. But there's an interesting thing here because I think the recruiter needs to really understand the true capabilities of what's required to thrive in those roles and having an intelligent conversation, which is both push and pull. It's not about selling a role; it's about really intelligently matching, and I think that's something that if done right, that's where the recruiter can add a significant amount of value. AI can remove unhelpful friction, but I think the process design and the experience design, we're in a world now where we can actually add friction by design to get candidates to qualify themselves such that they are worthy of a conversation from humans that actually have the authority and capacity to qualify candidates and put them through to a next stage. And there's another interesting dimension here, because organizations are being forced to really look inside their culture and put their finger on not just the skills, but the true capabilities of what it takes to thrive in a role, in a team, in an organization. And if we now produce thoughtful content that is representative of what we demand from our talent and what we're willing to give in return, and by that I mean the employee value proposition, this now stops becoming wallpaper and hype. And finally, we reach a stage of maturity where it's becoming really not just valuable, but imperative to have that information to hand and be able to articulate it in a meaningful way such that candidates will either opt out on their own, which is a godsend for a TA function these days, or really lean in and qualify themselves and want that role and put the work in and go through those extra layers of friction by design to prove that they want the role and that they're deserving of it as well. And then the final thing I'll say here is being able to do some of this stuff at scale, storytelling and brand building, takes the pressure off a TA function that hasn't quite got the resource planning data that they need, such that time to hire is always a stress and a measure and an indicator that puts incredible pressure on a TA function. And I think what we're able to do now is use tools and technology to be able to be farming at scale all the time, such that when a role becomes live, we've already got somewhat of a qualified talent pool to dip into. And our recruiters have got the headspace and capacity to then have meaningful conversations with candidates who are ready to talk to them. So there's a number of shifts going on at the moment, which is really exciting. But it does mean understanding the true culture of your organization, the true capabilities required to thrive, and then creating meaningful content that's representative of your organization and creating space for your recruiters that are now talent advisors to have more meaningful conversations. So, long way of saying the recruiters need to have those meaningful conversations as a talent advisor. And for the first time ever, their job isn't to recruit, it's to qualify and filter and really match. Because, I mean, across our portfolio of customers, the volume of applicants has never been higher, and it's still trending up, such that it's probably the biggest problem on most TA leaders' desk right now. Like, how do
So,
we?
so we're marketing
Yeah.
people. Why is having too many inbound leads a problem?
Well, I mean, there's only one vacant role at the end of this, and as I said earlier, the signal is getting weaker and the noise is getting louder. So what we're talking about is just pure inefficiency. And
Absolutely.
you know the the intelligence required to spot a great candidate versus an average candidate that has a great application is getting harder. So we talked about assessment years ago, and it sort of went away, and now it's the number one thing that I talk to our customers about, or they talk to me about. Really having to assess in a more 360 way something that distinguishes what you can write on a CV to the reality of the character of the person. That's a huge topic at the moment, and it takes both smart use of new tools and a whole new skill set of recruiters who they don't just know recruitment, they have to know the organization and what it really takes to thrive inside. And that's a different ball game now.
Sure.
Yeah,
So,
I
go
was going
ahead.
to say, Matt, we've got a few questions coming in
Yeah,
if
that's
now's a
great.
good time. Sweet. So one is how do we manage bias and AI at the top of the funnel, knowing there's a diversity of experience in working with this technology? Uh, I'll leave it up for anyone.
Here's my hot take. If we are trying to align better with the business and bottom line outcomes, then I think that we should stop worrying about compliance and start worrying more about innovation. And I'll just be 100% candid with you. Unless you're company happens to have a bunch of H-1B visas that you're originating and managing every year, the chances of you getting dinged for anything related to compliance in the next 3.5 years are pretty small and insignificant. So I think in that particular case, if you embrace innovation, DEIB generally naturally happens because you are looking through things through the filter of how people think. And then you have a lot of diversity readily present generally. I will defer to Bryan and Matt on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak quickly to maybe more of just if you think about it just from an AI perspective, based on what the question, there are from through technology ways to mitigate bias. If you are building AI in the correct way and in a transparent way, I fully agree with everything Matt just said, but I think there is like the hard rules that a creator or an innovator around AI should be following as it pertains to bias, right? And the evaluation of someone's background or a conversation should be the model should be predisposed to not take into consideration protected information or protected ground information and to obfuscate things that are traditionally introducing conscious or unconscious bias into the process for a human. So if you're building AI in a correct way and you're having it audited in a correct way, like I know from the seat I'm in right now, I can ivory tower generate build AI with our whole product development organization, based on the minds and the innovation of, who's in the doors at Humanly. We have to have that audited by a third party so that we are not, creating anything that we believe and with best intentions to be either help mitigate bias or have a model that is bias free. Like we need somebody else to tell us like we are doing things correctly, right? And while I agree with Matt, I think that there are a lot of boxes you can check as you are evaluating vendors that are generating AI, interviewing them very consistently with how you interview a candidate. I think that the responsible AI innovators are creating things in a way that are promoting, ways to remove bias versus, kind of plugging in the same kind of traditional ways that you can introduce bias into the hiring process. So I think like I'm trying to say through technology, there's a right way and a transparent way to generate AI, and then there's a way that scales some of that conscious or unconscious human bias by virtue of AI and makes things worse. It scales that in a way that is, effectively unproductive.
So you would say essentially we're replacing a good old-fashioned human bias with algorithmic bias,
That's
and
right.
now need to take some steps against that. Gotcha.
100%.
I think also if you can leverage the tools such that the candidates are making the decisions, the technology isn't. It's literally presenting information using friction by design to get less people to have to put the effort in to get through the assessment that you're asking them to go through. And then if there is a decision to be made by technology, I think it comes down to transparency and doing what you can to optimize the conditions such that you can. I mean, we're looking at sort of coaching a candidate and pointing out things that might be missing, things that might be reasons for not being a great match, and helping them through the process with absolute transparency. And I think if you do that, then you're going to mitigate against a lot of that sort of unconscious bias. But you're right, Matt. There's unconscious bias has existed, way before the technology. And I think what we've got I think we should be focusing more on the opportunity to remove more bias than there used to be, and be less worried about the remnants of any bias that might be remaining. And then this goes without saying. a feedback loop of looking at the results coming out the other side, looking for evidence of bias, and just looking for continual improvement over time.
That's great. Birch, were there any more questions that came in?
There was a second question, and I think we spoke to it a little bit, but I'll let you all chime in. I'm finding that AI is really helping that top of the funnel, getting through the sourcing aspect, but data is showing it's not translating to scheduled appointments or show ups. Do you see this across the industry? Uh, I don't know. It could be, yeah, specific to different industries, but I know there were some
There's so much,
points. We don't want everyone showing up. So there's,
yeah,
sometimes it's the right balance.
there's so much to dig into there, and it's the classic answer of it depends, because
Yeah, yeah.
like what's the messaging, what are the stories you're telling, how is the role being positioned, um, and you can take something and scale it up and just get more of the same, but there's a real danger, and until we get through a sort of certain sort of layer of maturity here, of just scaling up small errors or mistakes to create big problems, and I think this comes down to going back to basics, being super clear on the employee value proposition, but in a real strategic value to the business way, not a hype marketing sort of slogany way. And finding those human stories that really articulate or help somebody get a good understanding of what it might feel like to be in that role. And if you can really nail the specificity of those messages, then when you scale up, you're not necessarily looking for a volume that correlates with the budget. Actually, I think the goal now is fewer applicants, but more a higher percentage of valued applicants. And at that point, you can start to turn the dials up, but it's never the tools. It's always how you use the tools.
Right. And at the end of the day, metric wise, you still only need to make one hire per rec, right? So
Exactly.
everything else is just kind of noise. I think that brings us perfect to candidate abandonment is our next major theme here, as a strategic risk. So essentially, drop off is not inevitable. I think to the point Brian is making, and Matt certainly, increasingly companies are designing that. Obviously, some of that, it's like, attrition. Some of it is good, some of it's bad, but candidate abandonment directly impacts like cost per hire, quality of hire, hiring velocity, slow feedback loops, and unclear next steps generally tend to compound that failure and it gets worse throughout the funnel. So when I'm looking at just this phenomenon of candidate abandonment, Matt, or Matt, please just let me know because I'm really curious. Where are you seeing in the process that abandonment occurs the most frequently? Like where are candidates dropping? And what are some of the early indicators that I can see if I did an audit to predict that?
Yeah, great questions. So I think where we are most plugged in from like a humanly and our kind of portfolio of customers, we see it's a lot, it's top of funnel, like for sure. So it's that time to apply or time to that first kind of passive communication to the actual first conversation. We see it is almost I would say the vast majority of times it's a time-based drop off, right? I'll get to clarity in a second, but I think there's some clarity-based drop off, and I think but most of it is time-based. So and I'll give kind of some anecdotes and examples of where we've seen this resolve, but we see, if the time to that first conversation is beyond a certain time frame, you're going to lose the best talent. If you take more than a couple days to get on the phone or have a conversation with that candidate. And I think a lot of what happens, and this kind of goes back upstream to what we were talking about earlier, is that, AI is great at the top of the funnel, for that last kind of question that came in. But the example I'll just give you really quick is that everybody knows what a histogram is. But if you see kind of a resume evaluation using AI at the top of the funnel, we are seeing a spike in terms of like the evaluation and scoring so that Brian, Birch, and Matt all look the same as it pertains to their resume, right? So that means that's great. We've got some insight, but so does everybody, right? We've already kind of said that, like the majority of people that look similar. So the time it takes as a recruiting team to go through that list of candidates, even using AI, you're going to see drop off and abandonment. You're just trying to review that top funnel stack, because if you're using a 0 to 5 score, everybody's between a 4.5 to 5, right? Just as an example, right? If you were to ask 3 competency-based open-ended questions, conversationally, part of the application, whatever the modality, you are now going to see a spread across those candidates in a way that will better distribute like the fit and the signal for each one of those candidates, because they all answer those questions differently. There's no way to hide behind a tailoring service, and the drop off your time to talk to them is so much shorter. The candidate drop off is so much better at that top of funnel, because your efficacy of those very first kind of implementations of AI yield so much more intelligence to you as a recruiting team, that you are not losing people by virtue of trying to compare apples to apples and then make a decision, get the hiring manager involved, slow feedback. So it's all about like, how do I get signal faster? And the best way to do that is go beyond, what you're seeing at the top funnel steps, so that you can, effectively accelerate that first conversation and those top of funnel steps to reduce the candidate abandonment. So I'll pause there for a second, but hopefully that helps to answer the question a little bit.
That was a comprehensive answer. Thank you so much. Brian, just in terms of this whole issue of abandonment, obviously on
Yeah.
the recruitment advertising side, we don't even know what's happening with abandonment. I think the stat is 90% of paid career site visitors don't actually start an application, which seems like a fairly significant waste, hence the move to some of these modalities we're talking about. But I'm curious from an employer brand perspective,
Mhm.
like, is a high abandon rate proof of success or proof of failure for me?
Well, it's a really good question. And I think it depends whether it's by design or not. And I think there's a big difference between perception versus reality here. And if we think about the analogy I think about quite a lot on this point is if you think about Uber, the experience of getting an Uber versus calling the old taxi service, the perception is Uber arrives faster. But in reality, it's not that at all. It's the fact that you can look on your app and you know exactly where that car is. So you have the peace of mind of knowing what the hell is happening instead of calling the taxi every 2 minutes and they say, oh, it's just turning the corner now. And you tend to just give up on that taxi because you're not invested and you don't know what's going on. And we have the tools now to be able to design a brand experience such that we can keep you engaged. We can get you to invest in the experience with pre-boarding questions. Just like again, like the Uber, while you're waiting, you'll specify your conversation preferences or your temperature preferences. There's lots we can do to keep candidates engaged and actually increase the scarcity and the perception of how valued this role is. If we know that you've got to wait 2 weeks to be interviewed, but we send you content from the hiring manager and an employee story explaining what it feels like to start that new role, and we tell you that you were whittled down from 1,000 down to just 5 people, and we were really invested in seeing you. I'm going to feel different during that 2 week period than somebody else that's in the dark who only has to wait 4 days. So the perception versus reality and how your brand is positioned and proactively creating an experience for a candidate makes a significant difference. So speed is really important, but the perception of that experience is equally as important, I would argue.
And how does that perception manifest itself?
Well, it manifests in the way that, you first of all, you need to understand your brand and what you stand for and how you want the candidate to perceive your organization. So if one of your values is empathy, then maybe going out of your way to reassure somebody, to get them prepared for an interview, to send them content that demonstrates those values in reality. It all goes to build the brand. You don't need to talk about empathy. You need to demonstrate it with the experience that's, that somebody's having. So this is about intentional candidate experience and using tools to reinforce the messaging, such that that experience is something that a candidate doesn't want to leave. Versus using technology to just transactionally speed up a conventional experience. We've got the opportunity to leverage efficiency and speed, but also to add those moments of real brand experience that people don't forget and actually tend to lean in and invest more into as well.
So experiential marketing would be one of your trends that you're seeing for 2026, it sounds like.
Yeah, and it's like the aspirational stuff that we wanted to do just a few years ago, that we would do candidate experience journey mapping and say, like, ultimately, what could the best possible experience be? We now have the tools to
Getting
do
hired.
some of that at scale. Yeah.
Yeah. As it turns out. In the interest of time, I want to move on to slide 7, Birch, which is exactly what we're talking about right now, which is human engagement versus process industrialization, kind of for lack of a better word. And so one of the things that's so interesting to me watching the evolution of this market is there seems to be this tension between the candidate experience best practices that we've been talking about for years and the rise of the human as a widget who can have a number affixed to them and then either pass a screen or not. So, just Brian, keeping with you for a second, how can I have authentic, personalized engagement at scale? Is that oxymoron?
No, I don't think so. I mean, real human experiences, like the audience can be the human, but if you know your brand and you know your culture and you know the capabilities, you know the motivations of your talent, you can create a fantastic brand experience that makes people feel valued and wanted and relevant and differentiated to other organizations, such that you lean in and you become more invested. And this reminds me of an article that was published in the Wall Street Journal just less than 2 weeks ago, that reported a significant increase, bigger than ever seen before, in job titles with the word storyteller in it. Like, organizations are hiring more storytellers than ever before. And I think what's happening is organizations are starting to leverage tools to get more of what they want at scale. But the good old-fashioned storytelling is failing us. So it's going back to basics. Now that we've got the tools to basically do anything we can imagine, we're now afforded to go back to basics and just become better storytellers. And one of the outcomes of that, Matt, is then having a better sort of resonance with the messaging and impacting the candidates such that they feel closer and more compelled to stick in that process, because they love what they see, they love what they hear, and they can imagine themselves having that sense of purpose, impact, and belonging in your organization. So, one of the key trends coming out of this is organizations don't just have to get technically better at using tools, they equally have to pay attention, if not more so, I would argue, at becoming a more compelling storyteller at scale. And if you do that, the combination of these sophisticated tools and amazing human-centric storytelling, that's what success looks like this year.
Cool. So Sid Field coming to an office near you, it sounds like.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so Matt, just keeping on this point here, we talked about obviously, a little bit of the human and technology divide there and how they work together. Um, just from what you've seen, is there any places where automation can actually damage candidate trust, or conversely, um, what engagement behaviors are rewarded by candidates that you see the most? Like, what is the most effective way to engage with a candidate? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so great question. So we'll start with the latter question first and go back to the former. So I think and Bryan did a great job of articulating this, but like the what works the best is like I think eliciting a candidate response that's like this process knows who I am and respects my time, right? Like if I feel that way as a candidate, like the tools are doing at scale, these sophisticated tools are personalizing conversation, engagement, understands who I am, gives me transparency in terms of clarity. Bryan, to your the previous slide, which is like if I'm waiting for my Uber, if I got to wait 2 weeks, I can wait 2 weeks, but help me understand that it's a 2 week wait. I'm not saying to wait 2 weeks, but you get where I'm going with that. So I think it's all about the efficacy in the scale in which you can personalize, have autonomous conversations or human conversations in a way that's relevant for the candidate, relevant for the job, relevant for the company that's ultimately being hired. And if you can create that level of transparency where the candidate feels like I'm the only one in the funnel for this job, then you've done an effective job of engagement at scale. And AI does a great job of allowing you to do that. But I think whether you do it through AI, whether you do it from a human level perspective, then you're winning in terms of engagement and you're ahead of the curve from your peers. Now, where that going back to the former part of that question, where that starts to get icky and where you start to lose trust from a candidate is when this like I generally am not a proponent for AI making decisions in any way, shape, or form. That's I think Bryan, you mentioned it earlier in terms of like where humans still need to be involved, that human touch. I think regardless of how well you engage at scale and personalize, hiring decisions should never be made. Like accept and reject decisions. So if I'm getting that 2 a.m. rejection email automatically from an ATS, something is probably not right. Like I'm usually not. I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody on the call in the audience. Probably not reviewing resumes, at 2 a.m. as at least as a regular practice, right? So over automation, if you're using AI to negotiate and to try to have a human level like discussion around salary, around compensation, if you are trying to give feedback, sensitive feedback, and give that like transparency in a not thoughtful way through AI, you're going to erode trust. That's where the automation needs a human to be in the loop, intervene, and close loop with a candidate, whether it's good news or bad news. But any decision, any advancement in the funnel, anything around feedback, anything around negotiation, all that should be, I think, just from a personal philosophy and like from a humanly AI perspective, that's where humans should be involved. That's where the engagement starts to fall apart. Even if you did a great job with it at the top of the funnel, you need to be able to feel like humans are guiding and shepherding you through the process and creating that level of transparency around I'm being heard, they know who I am, and they're tailoring this specifically for me.
Awesome. And I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to do one quick little question here, and then Bert, you can take us home. So start with you, Bryan, and go to Matt. If you're looking at the same conversation in 2027, which sounds way too futuristic, a year from now, what are the things that you can see TA no longer doing that are mainstream today? And what should they be doing over the next year that they aren't right now?
Oof. I mean, the obvious one is throwing out the old metrics of volume and some of the transactional aspects. Because I think if we're still using the tools to leverage and scale up the conventional process, I think that's a huge miss this year. And I think the flip side of that is creating more capacity to leverage our humans, our recruiters, to be more of talent advisors. By the end of this year, I see less transactional recruiters and more strategic talent advisors, making the candidate experience a lot more human, personalized, and tailored to a more considered audience.
Awesome. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, my kind of hot take on this is I think the resume as a primary artifact will become less and less important unless there's another paradigm shift in the market between now and 2027, where I think recruiters and recruiting teams need to get really good at finding signal beyond your traditional kind of means of evaluation and artifact kind of consumption, right? And the teams that can do that at scale and to be able to start to integrate other context, the other data sources as context to augment what you're traditionally using as your primary means of evaluation and especially top of funnel activity like that. The metrics and the method of evaluation, I think, is going to be a significant paradigm shift over 2026. And the value of a resume is by the day, I think, becoming less and less important. So the more information you have to supplement, augment, and inform or verify what's there, that's what's going to tell the tale about where you should prioritize your human time, because the applicants and the AI, the candidate volume is coming and it's not going to stop. You've got to get really good at appending data that allows you to elevate the signal.
Cool. And I think the one thing that people are finally going to stop doing is spending half of their recruitment marketing budget on LinkedIn. And the one thing that they need to start doing is looking at recruiting as a retention mechanism just as much as they do at the external talent acquisition one, because guess where your talent is? Sitting in your organization. So with that, Birch, I will turn it over to you guys. That was awesome. Let's do it again next year.
Yeah, this was really great. Thank you both for joining. Want to give you all a chance. Like, Bryan, do you want to share for folks who don't know, like HappyDance, a little bit about what you all are doing?
I won't labor on this at all. If anyone's interested in an enterprise level careers site that's capable of helping you assess talent at scale and really showcasing your employer brand in a smart way, then get in touch. The QR code there, I think there's some free resources there that you might like. Yeah, feel free to hit me up. I'm on LinkedIn if you want to find me there as well. I think if you type in Bryan Adams, spelled just like the Canadian singer, #1, you'll find me on LinkedIn.
Sweet. Matt, do you want to give a quick overview of what we're up to at Humanly?
Yeah, I mean, humanly, it's probably learned through this conversation. I mean, everything that's conversational AI, from top of the funnel through interviewing conversations, sourcing technology, candidate engagement, everything from top of funnel through hire. We help you manage the conversations, the engagement, and help you to elevate that signal across all those touch points. We'd love to hear from you. Love to teach you more and show you our stuff at any point.
Awesome, thanks. And we're both going to be at Talent Acquisition Week in next month. So if you
Yeah.
happen to be in San Diego, please visit us